Well, dear readers, today I will share some fascinating stories from my time in the service. As I mentioned before, I work in the local police department in Ukraine as part of a rapid response unit, and I've experienced plenty of interesting situations. I will focus on cases that have happened to me personally, and just to set expectations, there won't be any chupacabras or creepy monster tales here, though there will be some pretty unsettling moments. The first story takes place when I was still working in the PPS, Patrol Post Service, and I'll start with it now. It's 2 a.m. on a Sunday, and my partner and I are on a foot patrol near a football stadium. Having worked in this area for quite a while, we knew that local troublemakers and drug users often gathered here, day or night. It had been a quiet shift, so we decided to take action, thinking we could catch someone among the stadium staff with some illegal substances. As we approached the stadium, we were met with a bizarre sight. A man standing there, talking to a soccer ball. He was speaking to it with intense gestures, almost like he was arguing with the ball. Naturally, we decided this was our guy. We walked up to him and began to detain him, but as we did, the ball rolled away, landing next to the benches. We called for a patrol car as the situation was becoming more surreal by the second. The man, who was calling the ball Grisha, tried to take it with him when the car arrived about 10 minutes later. We did not waste time loading him into the car and sending him off to the station. But as we watched, something strange happened. The ball began to roll up the hill in the direction the car had gone. My partner and I exchanged nervous glances and decided to leave the stadium, heading to the nearest warm-up station for safety. This next one is a cautionary tale. Never buy meat from people you barely know, even if they're from a neighboring village across the river. It all started when the duty officer received a report about something disturbing at a farmhouse. A severed leg was allegedly being gnawed on by pigs. So, we assembled a team, added a patrol unit, and set out for the rural area at 5 p.m. When we arrived, we found the man living in a barn, pigs downstairs and him upstairs. We went inside and, sure enough, we found a severed leg, likely that of a woman or child. We immediately confronted him, demanding to know who he had killed and planned to feed to the pigs. It turned out that a local drunkard had visited the man, probably looking for a drink and something more. During their encounter, the woman died, either from alcohol poisoning or perhaps the man's violence. No one could say for sure. The man had been eating her for over 2 days, roasting her in the barn, and when the body began to smell, he fed it to the pigs. The story did not end there. Pig buyers often passed by his farm when he was drunk, and knowing he was desperate for money, they would stop to buy pigs at bargain prices. That day, they found more than they bargained for. Pigs gnawing on a severed leg, while the man, drunk as usual, had fried human flesh on the table, washed down with moonshine. I once worked as a district police officer in a rough area, and let's just say, it was a lot to handle. But there is one particular case that stands out. There was an elderly man in my district, an Afghan war veteran. He wasn't exactly frail, more of a strong, gray-haired guy in his 60s, but his real issue was when he drank. He would get what we called a squirrel, a kind of delusional paranoia. When this happened, half of the village was terrified to go outside. The man would start seeing enemies everywhere, even in his garden, convinced that Afghan militants were hiding in the holes. He had been sent to a mental institution several times, but it never seemed to help. One day though, disaster struck. In one of his drunken fits, he killed a man, but not just any man, a man all the way from Zaporozhye, studying to be a lab technician. The bizarre part, the man had been drinking in his dorm at 8 p.m., and by 8:40 p.m., he was dead in the old man's garden. This is despite the fact that Zaporozhye was 2 hours away by car. The man was sent to the mental hospital again, this time for good. These are the first of my stories. If they are well received, I will share more. A group went out on a mission to handle a squirrel. A grandmother had called in, saying her son was drunk and destroying everything in the house. They arrived quickly and found him wild, swinging an axe around the house. So, the team, composed of the detective, the investigator, and a local officer, decided to take him down. They managed to wrestle with him and were trying to get the handcuffs off when, out of nowhere, the investigator collapsed, clutching his side and bleeding. Despite wearing body armor, there was no protection on his side, only plates in the front and back. The others were shocked. "You bastard, you hit our guy with an axe," they yelled. They started beating him, trying to subdue him, when suddenly, the local officer collapsed as well. The detective was in disbelief, wondering how this was happening. But then he realized the axe was gone, and the man was now handcuffed. Turning around, he saw an elderly woman standing there with a knife, stabbing them from behind, feeling sorry for her son, who was being mistreated. The team quickly arrested her, and the group leader arrived after hearing the commotion. It was chaotic. Another one. For 4 months, this elderly woman had been calling the police every day, saying the KGB was trying to poison her because she had seen them bury a bomb in a vacant lot. The bomb, she claimed, was huge, maybe even nuclear, and she urged the police to take action. She drove everyone mad with her calls, so they had to send her to a mental institution. Afterward, she stopped calling, and her relatives started calling every 2 days, saying the old lady had died. No one knew why. She had seemed healthy, though she had always been a bit off. During the autopsy, they found something strange in her body and sent it off for further testing. The results came back: severe poisoning with ricin, which led to her death. The third story is about a young patrolman, someone I've known for a long time. One night, while on patrol, they encountered a woman running towards them, hysterical and covered in snot. They asked her what happened, and it was clear that she had been through something awful. They hoped it was not a case of assault, as that would have made everything much more complicated for them. It was 11 p.m., springtime, and it was already very dark. She told them that she had been walking home through a vacant lot when she came across a pool of blood, with a bloody trail leading into the bushes. Curious, she went to investigate and found a man lying in the bushes. His head was not shot, but it was a bloody mess, just a grotesque wound. She panicked, ran back, and encountered the patrol. They left it off, figured it was just some bizarre situation. They called it in to the duty station and went to check it out. Sure enough, they found a pool of blood, just as the woman had described, and a body. They called for backup and an ambulance and stood there, smoking and talking to the woman. Then, they heard something, gurgling. They went back to the body and realized shockingly that it was still making noise. The man was alive for another 15 minutes. The patrol was stunned, as was the ambulance crew when they arrived. That man, despite having what seemed like a fatal head injury, was still breathing. It was my first year working as a cop. We did not have a lot of officers back then, so we were often assigned joint patrols around the city with the state security service. One day, I went on duty, and the duty officer got a call. The neighbor had not left her house in 3 days. The house was locked from the inside, and the TV was still on. So, we went out to check it out. By the time we got there, it was clear that she was probably dead. After inspecting the scene, we decided to break down the door. The neighbors helped us kick it in, and when we entered, there was a heavy, sickly sweet smell in the air. Just awful. The old lady had passed away. The neighbors started mourning about how great she was, and wondering why she left so early, which felt like a bunch of nonsense in that moment. 2 of the old women started pretending to faint, asking for water and attention, trying to steal the spotlight. I was still young and inexperienced, and this was my first time handling a dead body. I did not know what to do. My partner told me to call the duty room while he called for an ambulance to take the body away. I stood there with my back to the body, dialing the duty room. Suddenly, I heard a loud scream from behind me, and something grabbed my leg. I froze. The neighbors scattered in fear, and the elderly women who had been pretending to faint suddenly were not asking for anything anymore. My partner was crossing himself, and I was trying to keep my cool, wondering whether I should grab my gun to defend myself from some kind of undead creature. Everyone was in shock. After the chaos settled, we learned what had really happened. The old woman had been paralyzed for 3 days, unable to get up. She had been left in her own waste and had started to decompose, developing bed sores. That is the mess that we had walked into. Wow, you brought back a memory. About 5 years ago, I served in the State People's Republic. We got a call about a guy in a hut. Apparently, he had gone crazy, caught his sister out in the middle of nowhere with an axe and hit her right between the eyes. She managed to escape the house in a panic. So, we head over there. The area was not great, kind of like Burden, but not quite. It was violent and unpredictable. You never knew what to expect. We get to the building, but to reach his door, we have to go around the elevator shaft and pass by 3 other apartments. At the door, the guy yells something like, "Open up? Screw you. I will pack you up and throw you out." He was serious too. Now, we weren't looking for any heroics. My partner, Zorik, and I decided to jam the signal, let him panic for a bit. We went down to the car, suited up in heavy gear, helmets and such. Then we realized we'd forgotten the damn battering ram. Back to the car again. Zorik then says, "I left my rifle in the car. I'm sweating in my armor, saying great, let's run a marathon in this heat." Meanwhile, half the building is watching this like a Belmondo action movie. We finally decide to just bust in and figure it out. We head back to the floor, but something is off. The doors to the apartment look completely different. The fig tree on the landing has sprouted ears, and I'm sure it was not like that before. I tell Zorik, something is wrong here. What floor did we go to? He says the 10th. I pressed it myself, and I know I pressed 10 too, but everything looked weird. The architecture was different, more modern, even though it was an old place before. Now it looked like some Renaissance building. We checked the apartment number and realized, shit, we needed the 16th floor, not the 10th. We went up to the 16th, and there it was, exactly how it looked before, fig plant and all. We broke in without much trouble. Turns out, the guy was sitting next to his sister's body, holding a Saga shotgun and a loaf of sausage for some reason, who knows why. Anyway, we neutralized him with a solid taser shot and a well-aimed blow to the head with a stool. Because, let's be honest, we'll see tasers in our office about the same time humanity starts spending weekends in space. The moral of the story? After the shift, Zorik and I had a few drinks, and I asked, what the hell happened? We both pressed for the 10th floor twice, talked to that psycho through the door, but somehow ended up on the 16th. We never figured out the answer to that. In the end, we just shrugged it off. So yeah, that's the story. Sorry for the length and the content, but as they say, you can't rewrite the truth. I used to know a cop back in the mid-2000s. He often asked me to be a witness, so I ended up seeing some pretty strange things. One time, in 2006, a call came in from the private sector. An old lady had been hearing a woman moaning from Uncle Petya's house. He disappeared about 5 years ago. I showed up with the cops, and we brought the old woman along as an attesting witness. We approached the house. It looked abandoned, completely overgrown with weeds and nettles taller than me. The gate barely opened. The path was so overgrown that it was clear that no one had entered in a long time. The cops were skeptical, thinking the old lady had misheard, but she insisted she had been hearing the moans for 2 days while working in her garden. They scolded her for not calling sooner, but she swore no one had gone in or out of the house. The house itself was just as overgrown, and the doors sunk into the ground. The cops circled the house, but found no signs of forced entry. We checked the windows, but they were filthy and covered by curtains. Still, one of the cops noticed through a gap in the curtains that someone was lying on the table inside. It looked like a woman, but the view was unclear. They tried to open the door, but had to break the window instead. The old lady could not climb in, so she stayed outside, mumbling while the cops and I entered the house. We first came into the kitchen, which looked like a typical Soviet-style kitchen, covered in dust and unused for ages. Newspapers lay scattered on the floor. But in the next room, things got strange. The room appeared to be a living room, with a sofa, an old tube TV, and a sideboard. In the center was a table, draped in a spotless white tablecloth, and on the table lay a half-naked woman. She looked like one of today's TikTokers, covered in tattoos, wearing a lace bra, but this was 2006, so she was probably more of an emo or goth type. I was familiar with most of the alternative scene in our city, but I did not recognize her. One of her legs was bent at the knee, but as we approached, we realized she was dead. Then we noticed something even stranger. She was not wearing any underwear, and there was a large, orange object sticking out of her. It was not hollow, but solid, and covered in a texture like sandpaper. Inside, it contained a lead rod, which seemed to be for weight. A small hose was attached to the object, running along her leg, down to the floor, and disappearing between the floorboards. Despite the object, there was hardly any blood on the table, just a small puddle and a few drops. One of the cops stomped on the floor and said it felt hollow, like there might be a basement. We found a hatch in the corner near the sideboard and opened it. There was a wooden staircase leading down. One of the cops ran to the car to get a flashlight, and we descended into the basement. It was empty, except for some shelves with jars, farm tools, and a broken window. The hose from upstairs dangled from the ceiling, and beneath it was a circular imprint as if something had been placed there. Back upstairs, the cops searched the living room and found the woman's shoes behind the sofa. One shoe held her pants, and the other a gold bracelet. No other belongings were found. We checked the second room, likely a bedroom, but it was untouched. As for the investigation, the woman had died about 7 hours before we arrived. She was around 23 to 25 years old, not from the area, and no one ever came forward to claim they were her family. She was buried as an unknown. There were no drugs in her system, and she was otherwise healthy. She died from shock, likely due to the pain caused by that object. It was later described to me by the cop as a ripper and a dilator at the same time. The object had been used in a back and forth motion, simulating sex. The house's owner was eventually found. He had moved away to care for his sick sister and suffered a stroke. He'd been half paralyzed for 3 years and had not been back. He did not recognize the woman in the photo we showed him. There were still many unanswered questions. There were no signs of restraints on the woman's body, and no indications she had struggled. Where were her other clothes? The entire property was searched, even the outhouse, but nothing else was found. The basement window was small enough that only a thin person or a child could fit through it. The woman herself might have been able to, but why would she? And if she had done all this to herself, why drain her own blood? 2 fingerprints were found on the object, but they did not match hers. If she was not local, why would she come to a stranger's house to die in such a bizarre way? 5 years later, a drunk man at a train station was arrested for attacking a cop. It turned out he had been previously imprisoned for the murder of his wife in a ritualistic manner. When questioned, he eventually confessed to the woman's death. Witnesses placed him in the city at the time, but how they got him to confess is anyone's guess. The adrenaline and rage from today's events have left me shaking as I write this. I feel chaotic and a bit off, so bear with me. I had an interview scheduled at one of Sharashka's offices in a suburban industrial building, a grim place filled with unsavory characters. I brought a knife and a blunt object for safety. I arrived an hour early, expecting a simple adventure, finding the office among the Soviet-era buildings. Instead, I encountered something far more intense. I passed through the main checkpoint and asked the guard where to find Horns and Hooves, LLC. He shrugged and pointed to a 5-story building in the distance. I dashed over in about 30 seconds, eager to escape the heat. The area is not very deep. The workshops stretch along a river. Upon entering the building, I was met by an elderly guard and asked her the same question. She directed me to the 4th floor via the staircase, furthest from the entrance, then down the nearest stairs to the second floor. The odd route did not surprise me. These old buildings are always a maze. I navigated through a long, poorly lit corridor lined with offices. After climbing 2 flights of stairs, I realized the 3rd floor was the last. I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. I checked the 1st and 2nd floors, but they were both locked. When I reached the 3rd floor, it was open. A dirty, shabby corridor awaited. Frustrated, I decided to walk to the end and look for another staircase, but there wasn't one. I pulled out my smartphone to look up the checkpoint's number, only to find it was dead and stuck in a boot loop. Panic surged. I raced back to the 1st floor, kicked down a door, and found myself in the same filthy corridor. I tried to open various doors, but most were stuck. Finally, I found one that yielded to my push. Inside was a room filled with dilapidated furniture and rotting filing cabinets. The heat was so unbearable, so I opened a window and contemplated jumping out, cursing the old guard who sent me up here. When I stepped outside, I was greeted by a 3-story building, some windows boarded up, and it looked abandoned. I muttered to myself, what kind of architecture is this? As I circled the building, searching for the 5-story structure, the reality hit me. There was no trace of it, just a row of workshops. The industrial area appeared much older and more decrepit than when I arrived. I could hear machinery running, even though my original destination was newly abandoned. At this point, my patience evaporated, and I prepared myself for confrontation, armed and ready to react. I sprinted toward the sounds of machinery, reaching a massive, humming substation. There were no people or workshops in sight. I decided to climb onto the roof of the nearest building, feeling like a stalker as I grabbed a rebar for extra protection. As I entered the 3-story building again, a man around 40 approached me with an unsettling gait. Losing my grip on sanity, I pulled the trigger on my weapon and waved the rebar, shouting, "Where is the portal? I need to get back." He panicked and bolted into a room, moving in an unnatural way. I followed, kicking the door down, ready to confront whatever madness awaited. Instead of the room I expected, I found myself back in the same corridor, holding a rotting piece of iron instead of the rebar. Cursing, I exited, only to find a young man at the checkpoint, staring at me like I was insane. I asked him, "Where is the office of Horns and Hooves LLC, dear demonic gatekeeper?" He seemed just as lost and afraid as I was. After I explained my situation, he revealed that the staircase I sought had not existed for 30 years and had been blocked due to a collapse. He mentioned hearing strange footsteps from that area, noting that many offices were empty and the tenants were shady. Frustrated, I pulled out my working phone, called an Uber, and headed home. Now, here are some strange takeaways from today. 1. The weapon was unloaded. The cartridges were all in the magazine. 2. What felt like a 30 to 40 minute ordeal turned out to be nearly 9 hours. I arrived at 11 a.m. and left at 8 p.m. From the moment I stepped into that corridor, I felt a deep sense of unease. I can't shake the feeling that the old guard sent me on a route that was relevant 30 years ago, now possibly leading to a drug lab or chemical site. Did I breathe in something toxic and pass out, only to wake up in that utility room? The options now seem clear. 1. Return with friends, preferably equipped with gas masks. 2. Contact the employer to clarify my bizarre experience before they hear about my erratic behavior. One of my friends works in the criminal investigation department, focusing on finding missing people, what he calls lost individuals. He shared insights about the harsh realities of police work. In Russia, around 200,000 missing persons reports are filed each year, even in peacetime. About 100,000 of these cases are resolved, meaning the individuals are located, either alive or deceased, identified by relatives or by the missing persons themselves. This leaves a troubling question. Where do the remaining 100,000 go? My friend emphasized that he would only discuss cases involving official complaints filed by relatives or colleagues. I looked up statistics online and found varying numbers. However, he insists all published statistics are false, unreliable, and serve only to satisfy bureaucratic needs. The main categories of missing individuals who are not found include 1. Those who disappear suddenly, without explanation. People who go hunting, fishing, or hiking. Individuals who have a fight with their partner and leave home. Those who leave due to issues like alcoholism, mental illness, or drug addiction, often ending up as unidentified bodies in crematoriums. Runaway children from orphanages. Individuals who disappear under suspicious circumstances, such as deaths or ties to criminal groups. People who vanish during military conflicts or natural disasters. The homeless. Approximately half of the missing persons fall into the first category, those who suddenly vanish without a trace. That means around 50,000 people each year disappear for reasons that remain a mystery. Let's explore some of these cases. One morning, a woman who was a mother of 2 dropped one child off at kindergarten and the other at school before boarding a minibus. She never arrived at work, which was only a minute's walk, about 100 meters away from the bus stop. It was as if she had vanished. Her husband and her family searched everywhere, combing through her phone records and scoured their apartment, yet they found nothing at all. The minibus passengers recalled seeing her get off at the correct stop. She worked as a minor official in the district administration. In another case, a man who seemed to have it all, a wife, a child, a good job, left for work one morning in his Ford Mondeo and never arrived. Days later, his car was discovered parked on the side of the road with no signs of struggle or robbery. The keys were still in the ignition, and his laptop and phone were inside, charging. Despite extensive searches of the area with police dogs, there were no leads. He was just an average manager, not the owner of a business, with no debts except for a car loan. His wife, a doctor, reported no unusual activity on their accounts. Then there's the chilling story of a young mother who went to buy cottage cheese and milk. With her baby under a year old, she usually made quick trips while the child napped. This time, she left and never returned. Despite extensive searches lasting over a year, there were no clues at all. In a more perplexing case, 2 families on vacation stopped at a roadside hotel. After a night's rest, one man was missing. His wife and kids had been sleeping soundly, unaware. The hotel staff did not see anything unusual, and the door was not locked. Surveillance cameras only monitored the parking lot, and the men's belongings were left behind. It is assumed he went outside for a smoke, but no cigarettes were found. Another case involved a programmer who disappeared during his lunch break. Living with a girlfriend and juggling a car loan, he left for lunch and never returned. His dishes were dirty when she came home, indicating he had been there. His phone went silent an hour after he left work. Perhaps the most startling case is that of a police captain who vanished. He boarded a train for work one morning, but never arrived. Everyone involved was questioned, yet it was as if he had simply disappeared into thin air. These stories are just a glimpse into the thousands of similar cases across the country. Where do these missing individuals go? Here are some theories based on past cases where people were eventually found, alive or dead. 1. Murders. Bodies disposed of in various ways. 2. Kidnapping for forced labor. 3. Organ trafficking. 4. Forced prostitution. 5. Accidental deaths due to unforeseen circumstances. An experienced officer who joined the force in the mid-90s shared that the statistics have remained consistent over the years. He travels for work and finds that the numbers are similar everywhere. He even jokingly expressed a belief in alien abductions, given how inexplicably people vanish without a trace. Each year, around 50,000 individuals, men, women, children, and the elderly, disappear. While this figure may seem small compared to the annual population decline of 1 million in the country, these are real people, relatives and friends left in anguish, searching for answers. First story. My mother works in the police, and since I did not play outside much as a child due to the rough environment, I absorbed her incredible stories from the field. I don't recall every detail, but a few stories have stuck with me. One involved two young thugs, aged 13 to 14, who mercilessly targeted a weaker individual, aged 10, facing no resistance. They lured him to a basement or an abandoned location and began to beat him with whatever they could find, showing no signs of compassion. They even struck him on the head, disregarding his pleas to stop. The victim ended up with a fractured skull, bad enough to leave him alive, but unable to move or speak. What did these two geniuses do next? They left him in that state, returning later with a teaspoon. One of the thugs decided to feed the dying man, but lacking supplies, and given their twisted minds, they opted to feed him his own brains. With the spoon, the thug scooped out part of the victim's cerebral cortex and forced it into his mouth. I honestly can't say whether the man was alive or dead at that moment, but his mother later claimed that he had indeed swallowed the grisly substance. I can only wonder what happened to those two and the corpse afterward. Surely he could not have survived. Second story. In another tale, there was an ordinary man named Vasyan who loved to drink. He worked at a slaughterhouse, a job that did not require much intelligence, just a sharp knife to make a cut from ear to ear on a pig. One day, Vasyan showed up to work drunk, or not at all, leading to his inevitable dismissal. He argued, but ultimately lost his job. In a fit of anger, he took a piece of equipment as a memento and wandered off, most likely to the nearest liquor store. After drinking heavily, he headed home. The most sensible choice would have been to take the tram. He got on, still inebriated, and continued drinking. Understandably, the other passengers were uncomfortable, and one woman, Natasha, approached him, scolding him for his behavior, especially with children present. She decided to leave the carriage to avoid further confrontation, but Vasyan followed her. At the bus stop, he called out to her, and, wanting to impress, demonstrated his skills by drawing a line on her, this time with a knife. Worked as a mall cop for a winter. Bazillion little entrances and exits to secure. Place is creepy as hell when empty. Abandoned stores from the 1970s and 1980s walled off. Customers have no idea that they exist. Still can access them through service tunnels. One in particular creeped me the hell out. Closed Chuck E. Cheese kind of restaurant. Remaining lights inside are on 24/7. Still a ton of crap from the 1990s in there. Broken animatronic animals leaned against walls and in closets. Costumes from mall Halloween and Christmas events stored there as well. Forest of artificial Christmas trees. Outdated mannequins. Shoulder-high piles of Christmas lights. Always really hate going in there. Nobody ever talked about it, but if called to go in there, we would never go alone. Lock up connecting service tunnel early each time. Occasionally hear dragging noises from the other side of the wall. Ignore. Nope. Get sent by mall office to grab a reindeer thingy. 2 maintenance with dolly. Me and one other mall cop. Unlock service tunnel entrance. Pry open sticky door. Pops open. One of the animatronics is right up against the door. Nearly shit ourselves. One guy stands out in the hallway, while I and the others go in. Reindeer thing is not where it's supposed to be. Searching all over this creepy indoor forest, full of empty costumes, Christmas lights, and mannequins. Flashlight goes dead. Clumped together with maintenance guy with remaining flashlight. Find reindeer on prep table in old kitchen. Haul it out. Leave the restaurant ASAP. Can't lock the door fast enough. Last weekend at the mall. Locking up. Lights flicker once. Hear a split second of what sounded like muffled children's laughter. Sound was coming from across the wall. Fucking sprint out of that entire wing of the mall. 3 years later, and the knowledge that the lights are on in that room as we speak still gnaws at me.